This is section 2.2, part 1. This is actually a continuation of 2.1. I've already gave you a pretty good intro into what's going on here. We're going to work some more with Gaussian elimination. Again, sometimes I mess that up or mix it up with the Gauss-Jordan method. It's the same thing. We're going to start off today talking about pivoting. Pivoting is a method used in Gaussian elimination. It involves getting a 1 in a column and then zeros in every other entry in the column. I will point out that my notes do not necessarily follow exactly what's in the book. I think what they put in the book is more confusing. I've tried to streamline it. However, if you like what the book does, by all means, you can follow that also. Okay, same thing's in the book. Method to pivot a matrix about a given non-zero entry. So it can't be zero. Transform the given entry to a 1. Transfer all other entries in the same column to zeros. So I've got an example here. You'll notice I have a matrix of numbers and I circled where the -6 was. Now that's just, I could have done any of them, but I just picked one. So what I want to do, I want to pivot off of that number. So according to what it says up here, the first step is we need to get a 1 where the -6 is. To get a 1, you always multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of -6 is -1/6, and we're going to take -1/6 times R1. So -1/6 times 18, that becomes 18 over -6, that's going to be -3. I'm simply taking that number times this one, and then I'm going to take that number times that one, and there's your 1. And we'll talk more about this later, but I'm going to circle that. That becomes what we call the pivot. When you multiply to get a 1, you get a pivot. And then -1/6 times 15, that's -15 over 6, or -5 halves. If you ever have trouble understanding, and I know with fractions, they are tough on you, but let's say I want to take -1/6 times 15. If you just come over here to the side, or on a piece of scratch paper, you're taking -1/6 times 15. -1/6, I'm trying to get it all here, times that 15. So I wrote it over here. You could think that as 15 over 1 if you wanted to. So when you multiply that, -1 times 15 is -15, and 6 times 1 is 6. And then when you look at that, 3 goes into both of those, so 3 goes on top, that's -5. And 3 goes in the bottom, into the 6, 2 times. That's where I got the -5 halves here. You could also think of it this way. You got -1/6 times 15 over 1. Some of you guys have done this before. When you look at these two numbers here, you realize 6 goes into both of them. So 3 goes into here 2 times, and 3 goes into here 5 times. Now when you multiply, you got -1 times 5. I'll put it down here, that's -5, and 2 times 1 on the bottom. You still get the same one. I don't care how you come up with the answer. I'm sure you've seen both of those methods before. Okay, so back to the problem. So I changed the first row into this row. The second row stays the same. You got to be careful doing more than one row at a time. Right now I'm going to say don't do it. Okay, so now, according to what I had up here, I got the 1. Now I want to get zeros everywhere else in that column. So in this column, I've got a 1. Matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and just copy that down. You don't have to circle it because I'm done using that as a pivot. But now I want to get a 0 on the bottom. So to get a 0, the trick is you multiply by the opposite and add. Multiply by the opposite and add. The opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. So I'm going to take 2. What am I going to multiply by? Well, the pivot row, which is up on top. So that would be row 1, and I'm going to add it to row 2. It is important that you put the instructions out front if you want me to follow your work. Okay, so 2, and I got to multiply everything in the top row and then add. So 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Negative 6 plus 1 is negative 1. Then I go to the second column. I'm going to take 2 times 1 is 2. 2 plus negative 2 is 0, but we knew we were going to get that. Then I'm going to take 2 times, and let me put it down here. I'm going to take 2 times the top row, which is negative 5 halves, and I'm going to add that to 4. 2 times the top number plus the bottom number. So if I go down here, the 2's drop out. Negative 4 plus 1 is negative 1, and that number goes right there. That's what pivoting is. You change one of the numbers to a 1. In this case here, I indicated I want this number changed to a 1. And then once you get a 1 there, you want to get a 0 below it, and that's what I did. So I pivoted. Basically, this is one, what they call iteration, one cycle. I got a 1, I got a 0. The second column is the way I want it. Okay. Next up. Here's some more things. The book says the same thing. I just put in a different wording. Okay. So, Gauss-Jordan method, using pivoting to put a matrix in diagonal form. That's what I did on that other example, but now we're actually going to work a problem. We always start with a column on the left. We get a 1 in each column, and we do it along the main diagonal. So let's go ahead and get a matrix for this one here. So when I do that, I'm going to get 2, 1, 1, 7. You guys are good at this now. 1, 2, 1, 8, 3, 1, 2, and 11. So it says start with the column on the left. So we're going to start with this column right here. And out of those 3 numbers, somewhere we want to get a 1. Well, where at? Well, we want to get a 1 in each column, and it will be along the main diagonal. Here's your main diagonal. We talked a little bit about that. That tells me this 2 we want to change into a 1. To get a 1, you're going to multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 2 is 1/2. So we're going to take 1/2 of row 1. 1/2 of 2 is 1, and that's going to become my pivot. 1/2 of 1 is 1/2. 1/2 of 1 is 1/2. And 1/2 of 7 is 7/2. So that 1/2 here, I got to take times everything. Second row stays the same because I only do one row at a time. Now that I've got a 1 here, I want to get zeros. In this case right here. So, top row is going to stay the same. Now I want to get a 0 right here using the pivot. So all I have to do is take negative 1 times row 1. I'll just write it as negative R1 plus R2. So I'm going to have negative 1 plus 1 is 0. Here I'm going to have negative 1/2. And I'm going to streamline this a little bit. If you need to, you can go off to the side and work these out. But I'm going to have negative 1/2. Think of that as 4 halves. So negative 1 and 4 is going to be 3 over 2. Then I have negative 1 half. Think of that as 2 halves, so negative 1 plus 2 is going to be 1 half. And then I'm going to have negative 7 halves. Think of that as 16 over 2. So 16 minus 7, that becomes 9 over 2. Okay, and then when I'm getting zeros, I kind of lied to you a little bit, but you got to be careful. We're going to do 2 rows at a time. Since I'm getting zeros, I've got my pivot. Now I can get 2 zeros. I got a 0 here, I'm going to get a 0 there using the pivot. So the magic number is going to be negative 3. The opposite of 3 is negative 3, so I'm going to take negative 3 times row 1 plus row 3. Put my answers right there. So negative 3 times 1 is negative 3 plus positive 3. There's my 0. Negative 3 times 1 half, that's negative 3 halves. Plus that's 2 halves. So negative 3 plus 2 is going to be negative 1. That's negative 1 half. If you're having trouble with the fractions, you can play this back and do it over again. Negative 3 times a half, that's negative 3 halves. 2 can be written as 4 halves, so I got negative 3 and a positive 4 is 1, so I got 1 half here. And then negative 3 times, this becomes tough, that's going to be negative 21 over 2. That's 22 over 2, so negative 21 plus a positive 22 is 1. I got 1 half. As you look at that, it's starting to get confusing because you got all the fractions. That's why I usually do it diagonally, and the way I set it up, I just didn't have enough room. Okay, so at this point, I use a different pen. This first column is done. We found a 1 and we got 2 zeros. So what we did, we pivoted off the 1, that point right there, and got my zeros. Now we're going to go to the second row or second column. We're going to work on this guy here because that's where we got to get a 1 and it's always on the main diagonal. So I'm going to work with this column here. Okay, see if I can down. I may run out of room. So we're going to keep the top one the same. I'm trying to be as neat as I can. I started using this marker and it's easier for you to see, but I run out of room easier. Okay, so to get a 1, you always multiply by the reciprocal. If you go up here, we start with the column on the left. We got a 1 in each column along the main diagonal, which we did on the first one, but we multiply by the reciprocal. Up here, the reciprocal of 2 is a half. Down here, the reciprocal of 3 halves is going to be 2/3. So I'm going to take 2/3 times row 2. Put my answers in row 2. So 2/3 times 0 is 0. 2/3 times 3 halves, the 3's cross out, 2's cross out, that's going to be a 1. I'm going to circle it. That becomes my pivot for the second column. 2/3 times 2, the 2's drop out, that's going to be 1/3. And then 2/3 times 9 halves, the 2's drop out, 9 over 3 is 3. And the bottom row stays the same. Okay, so when I went back here and started, I had to get a 1 here, so I got a 1, then I got 2 zeros. Now I'm in the second column. I got a 1, now I want to get 2 zeros. How do you get zeros? You multiply by the opposite and add. So to get a 0 where the 1 half is, the opposite of 1 half is negative 1 half. And I'm going to multiply it times the pivot row, which is row 2, and I'm going to add it to row 1. Put my answers in row 1. So negative 1 half times 0, 0, plus 1, that's still 1. Negative 1 half times 1 is negative 1 half. Negative 1 half and positive 1 half is 0. Okay? Negative 1 half times 1/3 plus a half. I'm going to go off to the side. I'll take negative 1 half times 1/3, and I'm going to add that to 1/2. That's negative 1/6, and then you got to have a common denominator, so I got to write it as something over 6. 1/2 is the same as 3 over 6. So I got negative 1 plus 3 is 2 over 6, which is 1/3. I come over here, that number is 1/3. And then I've got to take 2/3 times 3. Come up here, that's 2/3 times 3 plus 7/2. So that's 2 plus 7/2. Think of that as 2 over 1. Common denominator is going to be 2, so it's 4 over 2 plus 7 over 2. That's 11 over 2. And that's what I put right here, 11 over 2. Middle row stays the same. I already got my 1 there, and I'm working on zeros in the error places. Now I want to get a 0 where the negative 1/2 is. The opposite of negative 1/2 is positive 1/2. So 1/2 times row 2 plus row 3. Put my answers in row 3. Okay, so 1/2 times 0, 0 plus 0. This is still 0. 1/2 times 1 is 1/2. 1/2 and negative 1/2 is 0. That's what I wanted. And then I'm going to take 1/2 times 1/3, add it to 1/2. 1/2 times 1/3 plus 1/2. 1/2 times 1/3 is 1/6. 1/2, think of that as 3/6. Add them together, that's 4/6, which is 2/3. That number goes right here. Then you're going to take 1/2 times 3. 1/2 times 3. And I'm going to add that to the number below, which is 1/2. So that's going to be 3/2 plus 1/2 is 4 over 2, and that's 2, and that number goes right here. So what I did on the second column, I got a 1, and then I got 2 zeros. So at this point, my first 2 columns are done. I'm putting in diagonal form. I'm trying to get 1s on the diagonal, so I need to get a 1 there next, and 0s every place else. Okay. Cheap on our piece of paper. Okay, so the next step is I want to get a 1 where the 2/3 is. So when you get a 1, we're working with the row 3. The other 2 stay the same. All I'm doing is copying the top 2 rows up there. Okay, now we're going to work on the bottom. To get a 1, you multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. So I'm simply going to take 3/2 times row 3. When you're getting a 1, you're only working on 1 row at a time. 3/2 times 0 is 0. 3/2 times 0 is 0. 3/2 times 2/3 is 1. And that's going to be my pivot for the third column. And 3/2 times 2, the 2's drop out, and that's going to be 3. Okay, I should have one more step. The bottom is done. I'm just going to go ahead and put those. I got my 1, now I want to get 2 zeros. To get a 0 in this spot, you multiply by the opposite. The opposite of 1/3 is negative 1/3. Times row 3, that's my pivot row now, and add it to row 1. So negative 1/3 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. Negative 1/3 times 0 is 0, plus 0, still 0. Negative 1/3 times 1 is negative 1/3. Negative 1/3 plus positive 1/3 is 0. And negative 1/3 times 3 is negative 1. So I got negative 1. Think of that as negative 2 over 2. Negative 2 over 2. Oh. Negative 2 over 2 plus 11 over 2 is going to be 9 over 2. Second row. To get a 0 here, again, I'm multiplying by the opposite of 1/3. That's negative 1/3. Times row 3. That's the pivot row plus row 2. Negative 1/3 times 0 is 0, plus the 0 right above it is 0. Negative 1/3 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. Negative 1/3 times 1 is negative 1/3, plus positive 1/3 is 0. And negative 1/3 times 3 is negative 1. Negative 1 plus 3 is 2. Notice what we got. All three of the first columns are done. There's your main diagonal. It's all ones, zeros everywhere else. And that means that your answer is going to be 9/2, comma, 2, comma, 3. And I'm not checking it. I'll let you do that. Hopefully it's right. So that's kind of a long problem, but they are. You write it in matrix form. You get a 1 in this spot, and then 2 zeros. We got a 1, and then 2 zeros. We got a 1, and then we got 2 zeros. Now 3 by 3, it's always that way, and it's always in that order. A 1, 2 zeros, 1, 2 zeros, 1, 2 zeros. Okay, I've got 2 more examples, but I'm going to stop there for now.